We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Amid Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 40a. On the previous Amid, the Gemara brought a brisa which was discussing the inner carbon chatases, like the par helam davar shel tzibor. That's the bull that is brought by the tzibor, by the community, when they unwittingly sin. And also you have the par kohen Mashiach, that's the par brought by the kohen gadol, and also the seirei avodah zarah, that's the goat that is brought when the community sins, an unwitting sin with regards to avodah zarah. And the brisa was bringing various halachas associated with these carbon chatases, and the Gemara now continues and analyzes the brisa. Amar Mar, the master said, Ainli ela matan sheva, I only know about the applications of the blood, the 7 sprinklings of the blood. That's talking about the sprinklings of the blood that happen on the paroches with these inner chatases. Shema akvos b'chol makom, because in general we find that those are required, and therefore we understand that they are required over here. And the Gemara asks, Heicha, where is this b'chol makom that we find that the matan sheva are ma'akev? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Rapapa says, Bepara, we find this by the para aduma, uvenegoyim, and we also find this by tzara'as. Rashi explains, Bepara vihiza el nochach pnei ol moed. This is talking about the sprinkling towards the front of the Oel Moed, the front of the Beis HaMikdash. V'chasav chuka li'ikuv, it says the word chuka, that shows that it's required. And b'negoyim, when it comes to tzaras, that's belog shemen shel mitzorah. That's talking about the oil of the mitzorah. V'hiza min hashemen be'etzbo. There it's talking about sprinkling it towards, again, the paroches, the curtain that divides the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kadashim. Uchsiv zos tia toras hamitzorah. It says tihiyeh toras hamitzorah. V'chol havoya ikuv. Anytime a word havoya, like the word tihiyeh, is used, that shows that it is required. And the Gemara continues, the Brisa said, Matan Arba Minai, and the Brisa said, how do we know that Matan Arba, that the 4 applications on the inner Mizbeach, how do we know that those are required? And the Brisa said, Talmud Lomar Kein Yasa, the Pasuk says Kein Yasa, that's where we learn that those are required. And the Gemara asks, Ma'ishna Matan Zayin Dechsivan Ukvelan, what's the difference that when it comes to the 7 sprinklings of the blood, so there we say that since it was repeated, we understand that it's required. Matan Dalid Nami Ksivan Ukvelan, when it comes to the applications, the 4 applications on the inner Mizbeach, those are also written and repeated. So what do you need an extra Pasuk, an additional source that Matan Arba is required? Don't we already have the same source as Matan Zayin? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Lo nitzrucha el Rabbi Shimon. We need this extra pasuk to learn this out, specifically according to Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, Lamala Omer, above it says Keren Karnos Shtayim, it says Keren Karnos 2. Lamatahu Omer Keren Karnos Arba. Below it says Keren Karnos 4. Divrei Rabbi Shimon, these are the words of Rabbi Shimon. And Rashi explains, Dechsivan Behedya, again, it's written explicitly, Uchefeilon V'asa Kasher Asa, like we said on the previous Amud, it says V'asa Kasher Asa, that's considered to be a repetition. Matan Arbanamik Sivan Behedya Uchefeilon, isn't that true also by the 4 applications to V'asa Kasher Asa, because the V'asa Kasher Asa, Akula Milsakai, isn't that going on everything? Why would one think to exclude them? And the Gemara answered, Lo Nitzrucha El Rabbi Shimon, we need this extra pasuk, this extra source from the pasuk according to Rabbi Shimon. The Yomar, because Rabbi Shimon says, Loch Sivbei El Shtayim, Ushtayim Acheros Behekesha Dehaikra. Really, it's only written 2 of the applications, and the other 2 are learned through a hekesh, through a comparison of this pasuk. Iskish par kohen Mashiach u par helam davar, that there's a comparison between the par of the kohen gadol, the bull of the kohen gadol, and the par helam davar, the bull, the par helam davar shel tzibor, the one that is brought by the community. Kida amr, like we said earlier, lapar, the word lapar, ze par kohen Mashiach, that refers to the par kohen Mashiach. Hilkach ilo dahadr kaflino lo have kefulin, and therefore, if we don't go ahead and repeat it again, so it wouldn't be considered that it's repeated. Lamala, again, Rabbi Shimon said that above it says Keren Karnos Shtayim. So Lamala is Bepar Kohen Mashiach. That's a reference to the par of the Kohen Gadol. And Lamata Bepar Helim, when it comes to the par Helim Davar Shel Tzibor, that's Lamata, that's below Keren Karnos. Again, Keren Karnos means as follows. Midemotzi Lemichtav Keren. From the fact that it could have said Keren, V'chasav Karnos, but instead it says Karnos, the horns of the Mizbeach, Have Shtayim, that's 2. To Islay Rabbi Shimon Yesh Em Lemikra, because Rabbi Shimon holds that we follow the way that it is read. And then they go and teach one to the other using this hekesh. And the idea over here is that since Rabbi Shimon says Yeshem Lemikro, we follow the way that the pasuk is read, so it's read Karnos in plural, and so therefore again above by the Par Kohen Gadol it says Karnos, that's two of the corners of the Mizbeach, and then it says below, meaning by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor, it talks about the other two corners of the Mizbeach, and we use the Hekesh of the Asa Kasher Asa, that compares the two, to say that the four corners are required, that it needs to be the four Karnos, the four corners of the Mizbeach, and so therefore you don't have that pasuk available any longer in order to teach the fact that the four, the Matan Daled, are required. That's why we need the additional pasuk of Kein Yasa according to Rabbi Shimon. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Eino tzarech, it's not necessary to derive Matan Daled, that the blood is applied to the four corners of the inner Mizbeach. It's not necessary to derive that from what Rabbi Shimon is deriving it from, because Harehu Omer, because it already says B'Ohel Moed, it says the words B'Ohel Moed, and we understand that to mean Al Kol Ha'amor B'Ohel Moed, on everything that is stated by the Ohel Moed. And Rashi explains, Harehu Omer B'Shneim, it says by both of them, Al Karnos Mizbach Ketores Samim Asher Lefnei Hashem Asher B'Ohel Moed. It says Asher B'Ohel Moed. V'hai B'Ohel Moed Yiseruhu. These words B'Ohel Moed are extra. To Haksiv Asher Lefnei Hashem. It already says before Hashem, so we know Ohel Moed. V'limedcha Al Kol HaKarnos Shebesoch HaHechol Tzarech Litan. So it teaches that on all of the corners of the Mizbeach and the Hechol, you have to apply the blood. So we already know that it's applied to all four from that, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we actually would simply know from V'Asa Kasher Asa that is a requirement. And so therefore, the Gemara continues and asks for Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, Kein Yasa Ma'avidle. What does he do with Kein Yasa? Because Kein Yasa is now extra according to Rabbi Yehuda. He doesn't need that to teach us the requirements by Matan Arba. And the Gemara says to that, Mi boy leilechidetanya. He needs that pasuk of Kein Yasa for what is taught in the following brisa. The brisa says, Lefi shelo lamadnu lepar yom kippurim lesmicho shiyare hadam. We don't know. We haven't learned anywhere that the par that's brought on Yom Kippur that there's a requirement of smicha, of leaning upon the animal, and shiyare hadam, of pouring the remnant of the blood to the base of the mizbeach. Minayin. So from where do we know that? Talmud lomar Kein Yasa. The pasuk says Kein Yasa. And Rashi explains, Talmud Lomar Kein Yasa l'rabos par Yom Kippurim l'smicha v'shirayim. That includes the par of Yom Kippur for the mitzvah of smicha, of again leaning upon the animal, and shirayim, pouring the remnant of the blood to the base of the mizbeach, to have par Yom Kippurim b'hai kroksiv, because the bull of Yom Kippur is written in this pasuk, Kida Amar l'par zeh Yom Kippurim, like it says again, to la par, to the par, it's a reference to Yom Kippurim. But the Gemara continues and asks, l'par Yom Kippurim lo lamanu, but have we really not learned that by the bull of Yom Kippur, that by the power of Yom Kippurim, have we really not learned the mitzvah of smicha and shiare hadam? It's not true. Ha'amrit lapar ze Yom Kippurim. You did say that lapar means Yom Kippur, and as Rashi explains, v'amrit lapar v'kevan de iskish. Once you have a comparison now, lahai israbu lahu smicha v'shirayim behekesha. So you can compare for this as well, that there's a halacha through the hekesh of smicha and shirayim by the power of Yom Kippur. V'lama lisu Kein Yasa. So we still have the question: why do we need Kein Yasa? And the Gemara continues and answers, Itzrich, the Kein Yasa is still necessary, because one might have thought, that when we make the comparison to learn to the Par Yom Kippurim, it's only in terms of avodos that are ma'akev the kapar, that are required for the atonement. Aval avoda de lo ma'akva kapar, but if it's an avoda that is not required for the atonement, and again we said smich and shiar hadam, it's a mitzvah to do them, but they are not required for the atonement, so emelo, so one might say no, that we don't use the hekesh for that. And so Kamash Molon, that is what the pasuk is teaching us with Kein Yasa. Rashi explains, Sagadai Dechamina, Ki Iskish La Avoda, De Ma'akva Kaparu. Maybe this whole comparison is just for Avoda that is required for the Kapara. The Iskish, that's what it's compared for. Kedechsiv, it's written, V'chiper B'haikra. It says V'chiper in this pasuk, which means atonement. V'luribuye Bey Es Bedam Utvila, Kidim Efarish Lakamon. And to include with it the laws that are learned from Es and Bedam and Tvila, as the Gemara will say later on. And so again, since one might have thought that the Hekesh is only for those Avodos that are required for the atonement, so you need this extra pasuk, you need Kein Yasa to say Smicha and Shirayim by Par Yom Kippurim as well. And the Gemara continues and asks for Rabbi Shimon. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon, Hi B'Ohel Moed, my Avidle, what does he do with B'Ohel Moed? Again, Rabbi Yehuda used B'Ohel Moed to teach the application of the blood to the four corners of the inner Mizbeach. What does Rabbi Shimon use B'Ohel Moed for? And the Gemara answers, B'Ohel Moed mi boy lei. B'Ohel Moed is needed to him, to Rabbi Shimon, it's needed as follows. Shim nifchasa tikra shal heichal. Let's say the roof of the heichal gets a hole in it. Lo hayamaza. So then you don't have those applications of the blood, because then it's not called Ohel Moed, it's not not called an Oel anymore, and so therefore this halacha would not apply. And the Gemara says v'idach, so the other Tana, meaning Rabbi Yehuda, where does he learn this halacha from, about nifchasa tikra shel heichel? And the Gemara says may asher, he can learn it out from the extra word asher. And the Gemara says v'idach, and the other Tana, meaning Rabbi Shimon, asher lo darish, he doesn't darshan the word asher. And Rashi explains, nifchasa tikras aliyaso v'gago, let's say again the roof of the Oel Moed gets a hole in it, sulav oelhu, then it's no longer called an Oel. And then the Gemara said, may asher, that Rabbi Yehuda can derive it from asher. Rashi understands that from asher, nafkale arba karnos, that actually Rabbi Yehuda is using asher to learn out the four corners of the Mizbeach, the applying of the blood, may asher, that's what he's learning from asher. Dematzi lemichtav asher lefnei Hashem be'ol moed, it could have just written asher lefnei Hashem be'ol moed, lamali lemahadr lemichtav asher, why does it again have to say asher? Ela al kol hakarnos asher bo'ol, rather it means on all of the corners you have to apply the blood. Dehai asher basra misham Mizbeach lo itzrich lemichtave, because again, the later time that it says asher, that's not needed for the Mizbeach, and so therefore Rabbi Yehuda can learn that from asher, and then again he still has Be'oel Moed to teach the idea that it has to be an Ohel. And the Gemara continues, Abaya says, Rabbi Yehuda nami itzrich, according to Rabbi Yehuda also, Kain Yasa is necessary. Again, the Gemara above suggested that maybe it's only according to Rabbi Shimon that Kain Yasa is needed, but not according to Rabbi Yehuda. But now Abaya says, no, according to Rabbi Yehuda also, Kain Yasa is needed to teach the Matan Dalid, the four applications of the blood on the inner Mizbeach, because Salkadai Techamina, one might have thought, Midi Dahavi Asmichu Shiore Hadam, that maybe the applications of the blood are similar to Smicha, leaning upon the animal, and Shiore Hadam, the remnant of the blood that is poured to the Yesod of the Mizbeach. One might have thought, Yafagav Dechsivan Uchfeilan, even though they're written and they're repeated, Lo Ma'akva, they're not required. So one might have thought, Matan Arbanami Lo Tisakev, maybe the applications of to the four corners of the Mizbeach are also not Ma'akev, they're also not required. And so that's what the Pasuk is teaching, again, when it says Kain Yasa, that they are required. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Yehuda nami afagav dechsivi matan arba behedya, even though it is written, the matan arba, the four applications to the Mizbeach explicitly, uchefeilon beviasa kasherasa, and it's repeated with viasa and kasherasa, but still, itzrich kain yasa l'Rabbi Yinhu she'akvenu, still kain yasa is needed to include the fact that they are required. Sal gadai dechamina midi dehavi asmichu shiore hadam, one might have thought that it's like the smich and the shiore hadam, the par helam gufei, dechsivan uchefeilon, because by the par helam davar shel tzibor, those are also repeated when it comes to Smich and Shiore Adam, Velo Ma'akve, and they're not required. Kidu Kimna Ilaihu, Miyuta, the V'chiper, because we said that there's an exclusion from V'chiper, V'nislach, Misham Tam, the Ein Ma'akvos B'chol Makam, and we said they're excluded, they're not required because we don't find them required in general. So one might have thought, Matan Arba, She'ein Ma'akvos B'chatas HaChitzona, Nami Lo Li'akvu, the applications to the four corners, which is not a requirement on the outer Mizbeach, the outer Chatos, maybe it shouldn't be required here, Dinimatu Nami, Mi V'chiper V'nislach, maybe that also should be excluded from the V'chiper V'nislach. Kamash Malon, so that's what it's teaching us. The Ilu Smicha V'shirayim Afilu Akrinu Lagamri Lo Ma'akvi. What is the difference between them? Because Smich and Shirayim, even if you didn't do them at all, they're not required. V'ilu Matan Arba Chodam Minayu Ma'akev V'chatas HaChitzon. And when it comes to applying the blood to the four corners of the inner Mizbeach, we know for sure one application of blood at the very least is required by the outer Chatos. Hilkach Maisinan Lakula Likuva Mi V'chein Yasa. Therefore we use V'chein Yasa to say that they actually are all required. And the Gemara continues, Lapar, the Brisa said that the Pasuk says, Lapar Zepar Yom HaKippurim, that's a reference to the bull of Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says, Lamai Hilchasa, to what particular halach is the Brisa referring to? And the Gemara says, Ila Akev, if you're saying that it's to say that it's Ma'akev, these avodos, just like they're Mi'akev by the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor, so too they're Ma'akev by the Par Yom HaKippurim. So Pshita, isn't that obvious? Chuka Ksiva Bey, it says the word Chuka, that says that these avodos are required. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Lo Nitzrucha Elo Rav Yehuda. It's necessary to have this pasuk according to Rav Yehuda. The Amar, because Rav Yehuda says, Ki Ksiva Chuka, when is the word Chuka written? Advarim hanasim bebigdei lavan bifnim. It's only on the things that are done in the white garments of the Kohen Gadol bifnim, within the Beis Hamikdash, within the Kodesh Kodashim. Shem hikdim ma'isa lechaver, that if one action comes before another, if it's out of order, lo asav lo klum, then what he has done is nothing. Aval dvarim hanasim bebigdei lavan bachutz, but those things which are done in the white garments of the Kohen Gadol outside of the Kodesh Kodashim, so then hikdim ma'isa lechaver, if one thing comes before another inappropriately, masha asa asoi, so then what is done is still considered done, it's still considered to be effective. And so therefore, according to what Rabbi Yehuda said, Ema, we might say as follows, Midekesidran lo ma'akvi, from the fact that again, by the dvarim hanasim, bebigdei lavan b'chutz, from the fact that doing it in the right order is not required. So hazos nami lo ma'akvi, one might have thought that these sprinklings of the blood, the applications of the blood also are not required. And so kamash malan, that's what the pasuk lapar is teaching us, that those in fact are mi'akev, they are required. And Rashi explains, li'akev, if you're going to say that the pasuk is needed by par yom kippurim to say that they are required, meaning sheyu kol hamatanos ma'akvos, that all the applications of the blood are required, so chuka ksib besof parshas acharei mos, it says the word chuka at the end of parshas acharei mos, v'haisa zos lachem lechuka solam, it says v'haisa zos lachem lechuka solam. And so then the Gemara answered, we need the pasuk l'Rebbe Yehuda, according to Rebbe Yehuda, beparakot siulo, that's in Meseches Yuma, and parakot siulo, diamar dvarim hanasim bebigdei lavan mibifnim, he says that those things which are done with the white garments of the Kohen Gadol within, meaning matanos uktoras sha'al bein habadim, that's talking about the applications and the ketoras that are bein habadim, that are between the staves. There we're talking again in the Kodesh Kodashim, hiktim ma'isa lechaveru lo asav lo klum, if you do it out of order, it's nothing. To chuka layu ksiv, because it says chuka. Avol dvarim hanasim bebigdei lavan mibachutz, but those things that are done in the white garments of the Kohen Gadol outside of the Kodesh Kodashim, kagon ma'atanos par uvisoyer shalaparoches, like the applications of blood of the bull and the he-goat that are on the paroches, on the curtain that separates the Kodesh Kodashim from the Kodesh, hikdim soyer lepar mashasa, also you do it out of order, it's still okay. To chuka lava layu ksiv, because chuka is not going on that. So ema, so one might say, midechesidron lo miakve, since it's not ma'akev to be in order, al mechuka lava layu kaima, so you see chuka is not going on that. So therefore one might think, minyan hazos kufayu nami lo liakev, that the number of applications, sprinklings of the blood also is not ma'akev, is not required. Im chasr mehen, if you're missing some of them. So kamash malon hekesha dahacha, that's what the hekesh, the comparison, is teaching us over here, that they are required. But the Gemara continues, Maskif lo Rapapa asks on this, Umimatzis amrit hachi, can you really say that? Rashi explains the question, Umimatzis amrit hachi del Rabbi Yehuda ikuva mehacha yolef, can you really say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the fact that these applications of blood are required, that it's really learned from here, from this pasuk, can you really say that? V'hatanya, but we learned in a brisa. The pasuk says, V'chila mechaper sakodesh, he's going to finish from the atonement. Im kiper kila, it means if there's an atonement, then it's finished. V'im lo keeper lo kila, and if there's no atonement, it's not finished. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. And Rashi explains, V'chila michaper kro yiseru, this is an extra pasuk, it's an extra part of the pasuk. So lo havale lemichtav ele v'hikra v'sasor hachai, this is talking about the avodah on Yom Kippur. All it needed to say was that you offer the goat that is alive. Im keeper, so it means as follows, if you did the atonement, meaning kapara hamakeves b'shar mekomos, if you do the atonement that's generally required in other places, kigon matan damim, matan shevo, matan dalid, meaning, for example, the application of the blood, the applications of the blood, like the application of the seven applications of blood, and also the application of the 4 applications to the corner of the mizbeach. So then kila, then it is finished, meaning, aval pishalo shavach shirayim liyasod mizbeach chitzon, even though you didn't pour the shirayim to the base of the mizbeach chitzon, to the base of the outer mizbeach, still we're going to say that those applications of the blood, that is sufficient. That's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. That's what it means in kiper kila, and in lo kiper lo kila. It's all dependent upon that kapara, upon the applications of the blood. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva in the brisa. And the brisa continues, Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Akiva, Mipnei ma lo nemar im kila kiper v'im lo kila lo kiper. What's the reason that it doesn't say that if you finish it's an atonement, if you don't finish it's not an atonement? And Rashi explains, Mipnei malo nidrosh hamikra keseder mechtava. Why don't we darshan the pasuk in the order it's written? V'nomer, we should say, im kila hakol, that if you finish everything, meaning afilu shvichas shirayim, you also have to finish the pouring of the remnant of the blood to the base of the outer mizbeach keeper. Only then there's a kapara. V'im lo kila lo kiper, and if you don't do that, it's no kapara. V'achim mefarish b'seder yuma, and this is what's explained in Meseches Yuma. The shirayim ma'akven ika beinayu, that the machlokus between Rav Yehuda and Rav Akiva is whether the remnant of the blood being poured to the base of the mizbeach is required or not. Alma ikov le Rabbi Yehuda mehacha nafka. But in any case, you see that the idea that it's required according to Rabbi Yehuda is really learned out from here. It's learned out from this pasuk again, because he's darshan questioning the pasuk in order, so to speak. And the Gemara continues and answers. Amar Papa says, Lo nitzrucha elo le'es dam u'v'tfila. What it's needed for is the things that we learn from es, dam, and tfila. And the Gemara continues and elaborates es. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. What are we referring to with the word es? Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Lo nitzrucha lahachshir. It's needed lahachshir to render fit. And Rashi explains, Lo nitzrucha hay demakish par Yom HaKippurim lepar helam davar lepar kohen Mashiach. The fact that we're comparing the par of Yom Kippur to the par helam davar and the par kohen Mashiach, what is that needed for? It's ela le'es bedam u'tvila. It's needed for es, bedam, and tvila. The par kohen Mashiach ksiv, because by the par of the kohen gadol it is written v'toval hakohen es etz bo badam. That's where it says these words es, and it says badam, and it says v'toval. V'ikasha b'hai, and Rashi says if you're going to ask that in this pasuk, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amid Beis.